Good morning. Welcome to our studies in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6 onwards. Paul is confronting immature, carnal Christians and Christians who are somehow led by the worldly wisdom, their human nature. So Paul is asking this harsh, rhetorical question, three questions that he poses. He says, for who makes you different from anyone else? You Corinthians, in what way you are different? And if you have been made different, who made you different? Is it Paul or Apollos? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did not receive, why do you boast as though you did not? In verse 7. So somehow the Christians at Corinth, they were arrogant, unteachable. Sometimes they complain they have not received. Sometimes they pose as if like they have received so much. So in verse 8 he says, already you have all you want. Already you have become rich. You have become kings. And that without us. How I wish that you really had become kings so that we might be kings with you. So he's being, sarcastic and trying to point them towards their own foolishness and their stupidity. In verse 9 he says, for it seems to me that God has put us apostles on display at the end of the processions. At the end of the processions, normally it will be captive prisoners who will be, following the procession. So he said, yeah, we are apostles, but now we are at the end of the processions because you guys have become kings. You are smart and you know everything. You are at the judgment seat. You decide who is better, whether Paul and Apollos. Sometimes we as a immature, we compare our leaders, and the leaders doesn't like comparing them with others. They don't like to be pointed out some of their flaws and mistakes and then make fun of them. I think probably the church at Corinth, they were making fun of Paul, trying to expose his weakness, comparing with Apollos. And so here is a man of God who is hurt, and that's why he's asking this sarcastic question. Verse 9 he says, for it seems to me that God has put us apostles on display at the end of the procession, like men condemned to die in the arena. We have been made a spectacle to the whole universe, to angels, as well as to men. We are fools for Christ, but you are so wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are honored, but we are dishonored. To this very hour, we go hungry and thirsty. We are in rags. We are brutally treated. We are homeless. In verse 12 he says, we work hard with our own hands. When we are cursed, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure it. When we are slandered, we answer kindly. Up to this moment, we have become the scum of the earth and the refuse of the world. He is hurt and he says, yes, we have been cursed. We have been, treated very badly, but we will never retaliate. We will still treat you kindly. We may be scum of the earth, but we still have the ability to be gracious and loving. We may be the refuse of the world, but we will still be serving you. Verse 14 he says, I'm not writing this to shame you, but to warn you. Paul, through his hurt feeling, through his sarcastic writing, he's alerting the Christians at Corinth to use the godly wisdom, not worldly wisdom, not be driven by their human nature, but through the Spirit of God. So he's saying, my dear children, he uses the word to a little bit sober it. In verse 14, he says, my dear children, even though you have 10,000 guardians in Christ, you do not have many fathers. For in Christ Jesus, I became your father through the gospel. So Paul recognizes the fact that, yes, you may not be listening to me, you may criticize me, you may look down, you may evaluate me, you may compare me, and you may highlight all my weaknesses, and you may try to somehow condemn me, but I do realize that I'm still your father and you are my children. So I'm not going to retaliate. I'm not going to treat you harshly the way you are treating, but I will still like to serve you and be kind to you. From Paul we can learn so much, especially in our Asian context. Dr. Philip, he says, and now far removed from it are those of us in leadership in South Asia. Far removed from it. We are those of us in real leadership in South Asia. Often we retaliate, and often we get either we retaliate or we withdraw, and we wash off our hands. The picture we get from Paul is of a life of extreme hardship. Dr. Philip writes, extreme hardship, poverty, vulnerability and humiliation, being ostracized, punished and persecuted. Although this is accomplished by dishonor and shame, in reality it brings a different kind of honor, for we are living in the light of the cross of Christ. We have to consider how we measure up. How we measure up. That we don't behave the same way that immature Christians or the carnal Christians or the Christian who are not led by godly wisdom but the worldly wisdom, that we as a leaders do not retaliate the same way. May God help us to learn from the life of Paul. May you live like St. Paul. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.